Hi everybody, I hope my sound is okay right now. My name is Attila Olenik and I'm a web developer here in Trans-Europe. I'm the first presenter today, but I promise I won't be long. This is only an introduction because this webinar was my idea and I want to explain why. I'm a PhpStorm user for just 2 months, so I'm a newbie, but an in-house static user. As a developer, I have more than 76 company-based web processes and applications, for example, API integrations and cron tabs and backups and backend front-end sites. And every time when I needed to modify something, I was in trouble. I was in trouble because I insisted for too long to use my usual tools, WinCP and Notepad++, but the time came when I had to make a switch because my programming environment became too chaotic. Duplicated functions, never-ending CSS files, and useless documentations. That was the reason. And 1 year ago, I switched to Dreamweaver. This was a cool software, and I learned a lot. This was part of my Creative Cloud subscription, but I was simply unable to love it because it was too complicated and big. I was slow, and after when I'm starting to put my work to Git, it becomes much slower. The editor was amazing but useless for me, so after a few months I started to use Notepad++ again. And then came the big idea. Trans-Europe has been a JetBrains partner for a long time, and I tried to using PhpStorm to catalog my work, and it was simple, and I configured my first project and opened my first file, and it was also simple and it was quick, much quicker than Dreamweaver. I really liked it and I wanted to learn more, so I started to organize some meetups, and JetBrains has supported this idea. And that's why we are here now, to learn about PhpStorm and WebStorm. JetBrains gifted one of our attendees a full all product pack license for free. We will randomly select the winner and we'll notify him on email. So good luck for everyone. And now 2 great instructors are here with us, Maarten Balliauw and Paul Everett. Both have a universe in their minds and both want to share with us. As everybody have noticed, this is not a typical webinar. We are hosted on Google Meet. Everybody can ask questions and interact, but please switch your microphone off during the presentations. Thank you, and now welcome Maarten to start your session.
Hey, thank you for the introduction. Let me quickly switch to showing my screen here. Where are we? Right, there we go. Okay, I hope everyone can see this one. Welcome from my side as well to this webinar. As Attila already mentioned, we have Paul here, my colleague, and myself, and we're both developer advocates at JetBrains. So that means we do a lot of these kinds of webinars, but our main job is actually helping our users, we hope, to get better at using all the tools we have. Now, in case you have no idea who JetBrains is, quick couple of words about that. We are a company that tries to build productivity enhancing tools for software developers and teams. So basically what that means is that, for example, we build IDEs that help you become more productive, faster at doing your work, writing better code and things like that. Headquarters in Prague, Czech Republic, but R&D labs pretty much all around the globe, in Russia, Munich, Amsterdam, Boston, and so on. So what we do is we build those developer tools, and we try to do that by automating things that you shouldn't be doing manually, by providing code corrections, by speeding up the stuff that you are building, and basically freeing you from the hard labor that is often copy-pasting code around in your code, and really allowing you to grow and think about your code, and instead of doing the dumb work, actually do the more productive work and be good at writing your code. So what we do is we build those IDEs. So we have them for pretty much every language out there. We have PhpStorm for PHP. We have WebStorm for web development. We have PyCharm for Python developers. We have Rider for .NET developers and so on. We also have our own profilers, especially for .NET, for example. If you want to do memory profiling or performance profiling, we have that as well. We have a couple of team tools as well. So if you need a CI server, we have TeamCity for that. We have UTrack for issue tracking, but also more developer focused than a lot of the other issue trackers that are out there. And we also have our own programming language called Kotlin, and that's basically an alternative or an add-on onto Java that you can also use to write code in a much more modern way than typical Java would offer you. Now, enough about that. Before we dive into PhpStorm and WebStorm, I just want to spend a couple more words about the fact that all of the IDEs that we built, that they are built on a shared platform. So even if you're not a PHP developer or a web developer or anything else, all of the things that you will be seeing in the demos that myself and Paul will be doing will be very similar in all of the other IDEs that we have. So for example, if you are a Python developer, and you wonder how navigation works or code inspections work, the things that we will be showing you will be similar in that IDE because all of the IDEs are built on the IntelliJ community platform. That means a lot of features are the same, the look and feel is the same, and we simply add plugins for specific languages or specific frameworks that are applicable to only just one language, for example. In case you are really brave and adventurous, you can also build your own IDE. Actually, Google did that with Android Studio. They are also using IntelliJ IDEA community platform and have built the Android Studio on top of that one. So if you want to build your own IDE, if you feel adventurous, you can always have a look at that one as well. Now, let's dive into PHP and web development. So I already mentioned that I will be showing PhpStorm. Paul will be showing off WebStorm, and basically PhpStorm gives you all the PHP specific features where you can use, of course, PHP as a language, but also frameworks like Symfony, Drupal, WordPress, Joomla, Composer, and so on. But you also get all the WebStorm features inside of PhpStorm. So all the things that that Paul will be showing in terms of JavaScript and TypeScript and CSS and React and so on are also available in PhpStorm. So PhpStorm is basically the combination of PHP as well as the stuff that is in WebStorm. Right, with that, let's call it demo time because slides are only one thing and they're not super interesting. So what you see here is PhpStorm, and once you launch it, you will see that you get your list of recent projects on the left-hand side. And of course, you can create a new project, open a project, check out from version control and so on. Also from this welcome screen, you will see that there's a plugins window where you can install additional functionality into the IDE. And I just want to quickly mention that I installed one plugin called Presentation Assistant, and you will see whenever I use the keyboard to activate some keyboard shortcuts, you will see that this Presentation Assistant will actually show you the shortcut on screen, so you can also follow along what I'm doing on my keyboards. Also, this is the light theme. Now, if you prefer to have PhpStorm or WebStorm in a darker theme, you can also change that from the settings here and, for example, go with Darkula, and then you will see that you have a dark theme. But I myself prefer the light theme, so I'll switch back. But I think Paul goes with the dark theme typically. So let's open an existing project that we have, because it's, of course, more interesting to open up an existing one instead of starting from scratch, building something. So this is PhpStorm. You see that you have two windows on the left and at the bottom where you can open up tool windows, terminal, database changes, and so on. There's a couple on the right-hand side as well. And if you open up any file, you will see, of course, an editor that shows you JavaScript or PHP or whatever language that you are working with. Now, before we dive into the editor, I quickly want to highlight the fact that PhpStorm and WebStorm and so on are very keyboard focused. So there's a lot of shortcuts that you can use to navigate around in the IDE through your code base, but also to different functionalities that are in the IDE. So for example, when I want to highlight my project tool window, I can do Alt-1 on Windows, and you will see that I will be focusing that one. Let's maybe hide that one so you can also see the shortcuts. So even if this is not visible, I can simply press Alt-1 or Command 1 on Mac, and you will see that this thing is there. I can move around with my arrow keys, and if I enter on something, you will open up that file in the editor. Now, also before we dive in deeper, there's one thing I want to mention, and it is that a lot of tool windows in the IDE are searchable. So imagine you are searching for a specific file that you know is in this tree that you have open, and imagine you want to search for the word navigation bar, which would be in a couple of these files here. We can simply not use any shortcut, but just start typing navigation, and you will see that those things are highlighted, and we can jump between them and quickly navigate to some specific files that we have in the project view there. Right, there's a lot of shortcuts in PhpStorm and in WebStorm. There's one that is super important, and that is double shift, because that's the search everywhere functionality, and that will really get you everywhere you want to go in the project. Whether it's recent files, whether it's classes that you want to go to, whether it's files that you want to go to, or even actions. So for example, if you are searching for settings and you want to find the settings menu, you will actually see that the settings menu is in there, and we can open it from here as well. So there's no menu involved. We can simply double shift and search for whatever we are searching for. This is also very useful if you don't know the shortcut for anything, for example, because if you want to go to the settings, you can already see that we have the shortcut here as well. So if you double shift search for something, you can already start learning some of the other shortcuts that are in there. Now, when I started learning PhpStorm and all of the JetBrains IDEs, what I did was also go to the help window and find the key map reference. If you use this one, you will actually open up the website of JetBrains, and you will find PDFs with the common key maps and the keyboard shortcuts that you can use. And typically when you're getting started, print them, put them next to your laptop or next to your computer, and try to learn a new one every single day. That's one that I can give you. Right, let's dive in. So what we want to do is highlight a couple of the features that are in PhpStorm and WebStorm, and one of those things is getting around your code base, so navigating to places that you have in your code base. So I already mentioned that you have double shifts, and we can use that double shift to find files that are inside of our project. So if you search for this customer.js, you will find that one. If we search for a customer repository, I have to type correctly, of course. You will find that one as well, and you can open that in one go. Now, this is not super interesting because I had to type this customer repository completely. There's also a way of navigating more quickly in all the search windows, and that is using camel humps. So you may notice that we have the customer repository with a capital C and a capital R. If we search for CR, you will see that the customer repository in this case also matches because those were capitalized, and we can quickly go to one of those things if you want to navigate there. We can not only navigate to the things that we have in our own code base, for example, so we had that customer repository, but we can also navigate to things that are outside of our project. So whether you're using NPM or you're making use of any of the base classes that are in PHP, what you can do is also search, for example, for array object, which is a type that is in PHP, and you will see that that type is found in the standard PHP library, and we can actually open it and see what is in there and look at how it was implemented and all of the function constructs that are in there. So we can see all that documentation if we want. Another one that is there in terms of navigation, because you may know what you are looking for and use this double shift and find something that you know that is in your code base. But sometimes developing is just switching around back and forth between a couple of files or a couple of places that you had in your code base. So what you can do is make use of the recent locations feature. And if you use that shortcut, you will see that all of the recent locations that we were in our code base are shown in there. If we do the shortcut again, you will see the recent edit locations, in this case none. But you can quickly navigate around the places that we have been already in the code base and, for example, go back to this customer.js, for example. Of course, control tabbing between tabs also works if you want to navigate from one tab window or editor window to another one. Now let's do some other navigations. I have a class somewhere that is called 4.1 underscore, should use the file probably. It's this one, yep. In here, we have some code that is making use of a customer class. Now that customer class is something that we can navigate to by, again, using the shortcut and finding the customer class and navigating to, I don't even know which one it is here, but probably it's better to just navigate from here because we are already in the editor. We already know that we are working with this customer on this line of code. So what we can do is either control-click on that customer if you want to use the mouse, or you can use Control-Shift-B and navigate to the implementation or the type declaration of that customer. Same thing here, we have an interface that we are implementing. If you want to go to that I customer, again, we can Control-Click or Control-Shift-B and go to that I customer there. So we can navigate that entire type hierarchy if you want to go through it. Now, speaking of type hierarchy, we have this iCustomer. You already saw that we had this customer that implements the iCustomer. And if you look at the code here, we also have a gold customer, and that gold customer also extends customer. So you see there's some type of a type hierarchy in our code here. And what we can also do is, for example, when we are in the interface, we can use the Control-H shortcut and look at the entire type hierarchy of all the implementations of our customers. So you will see a new tool window, and we can navigate back and forth between, for example, the silver customer, go back to the customer, go back to the interface, and so on. So really easy to navigate around the things that you have in there. Now, another one that we have, and let's go to another file here, this one. Another one that we have is finding usages, for example, of something. So what we can do is find where this adjust method is being used in our code. So what we can do is put our caret on there, on that adjust method there, and use either Control-Alt-F7 as a shortcut to show all of the usages where we are making use of this one. But this is a simple pop-up. If we prefer to have all of that in a nice tool window, what we can use is Alt-F7 instead, and you will see usages in this tool window, and we can go to all the usages of that adjust function. Now again, here I mentioned that everything is searchable, or a lot of things are searchable in the IDE. So if we search for make use of and just start typing, you will see that we immediately jump to that item in there as well. So again, start typing anywhere you are, and you can find something that you may want to navigate to in the source code there. There's lots of other navigations around. I would suggest if you're new to PhpStorm, create a new project and create a PhpStorm workshop project if you want to try all the navigations that are in there. That will basically be the project that I'm using here and allows you to quickly learn a number of the features that are in PhpStorm. Now let's do something else. We have navigated around our code, a couple of the navigations that are in there. Now let's see what else PhpStorm does. One of the things PhpStorm does is that we have highlights for a lot of things that are happening in your code. So for example, you will see this red squiggly here where we forgot a semicolon. You will see that we have, when we hover that's PhpStorm expected a semicolon to be there, and we can add that and fix the code there. You'll also see, when we put that back, that on the right-hand side here, we have the number of errors and warnings that are in our current file that we have open. So you will see there's a lot of warnings, and I can simply click on those in the scroll bar there and jump to an error or a warning that we have in the file. But yeah, let's fix this one. Right, so we have that one. We also have things like, for example, if statements that do not work properly. If you look at this code, for example, we forgot the double equal sign there to make this comparison. So basically what it means is that our if statement doesn't have a body and is not really valid. So what we can do is, for example, fix that and remove the entire if statement because we're not using it anyway. So what you will see is when you have one of those warnings, you will see this, this light bulb show up. If you have an error, it will show in red. If it's a warning, you will see a nice yellow one. And you will see that there's an inspection that says statement has empty body. So what I can do is either click that light bulb or use the Alt-Enter keyboard shortcut and look at the options for this one and, for example, say that I want to check for cases of this in my entire project. So I can search for this inspection in my entire project and find everywhere where I have the same problem in the code base here. Right, a couple of other ones that are in there. Maybe let's go to another class. This one. You will see that there's warnings that are also that can automatically be corrected by PhpStorm as well. So you see that misspelled here is actually misspelled. You see that's a warning, you see the light bulb, and if we Alt-Enter on that one, you will actually see that we can rename this one to the proper misspelled. And there we go, this has been updated. Same thing here, you will see this person class, there's a warning because it's in yellow. It says us that we have an undefined class person. So let's maybe type Alt-Enter and see what we can do. We can import that class because it's somewhere in our code base. And what will happen is that we can select the one to import. So let's take this one, for example, and you will see that this class now resolves, but also that our person is now being used as a using statement in PHP here. There's a lot of other ones. For example, this one, this is an undefined variable on my current class. So what I can do is either Alt-Enter and say add fields, because if we intended to use this variable, maybe we want to actually add a field to our class, and we can do that, and you will see that by now we have this variable and automatically our code will compile, it will run properly, and so on. So that's really easy to quickly fix some issues that you may have in your code. From the menu here, for example, you can also go to code and then inspect code. What we can do is also run all of the inspections that are available in PhpStorm on our entire project. This will probably take a while because this is quite a big project, but it will run all of the inspections that are available in PhpStorm. Now, just to give you a quick idea of how many inspections are available, if you search for inspections in the settings, you will see that for pretty much every language, there's a bunch of inspections available. So for CSS, for HTML, for JavaScript, and so on, but also for PHP. And you will see that there's a number of them that are enabled by default. You can set a severity. So for example, if you always want to have only one return statement in a method, you can say this should be an error, and then from that moment on, PhpStorm will mark that as an error. But just to give you an idea, there's a lot of those inspections in terms of code style, in terms of error handling in your code. So for example, if you have an unhandled exception, PhpStorm will warn you when that's the case. When you have probable bugs where you have an assignment in a condition, for example, or a division by 0, PhpStorm can warn you about those things, and typically also comes with a quick fix where you can press that Alt-Enter key to fix things for you. Right, so we've seen navigation, we've seen a little bit of the code inspections. Now let's maybe also write some code to see how that works in PhpStorm. So what I'm going to do is close a couple of these things here and add a new class. And the shortcut for that is Alt-Insert. Whenever you Alt-Insert, you're actually telling PhpStorm you want to create something. If I do Alt-Insert in the Project Explorer here, you will see that I can create a file. But if I do an Alt-Insert in the editor, you will see that I will be able to generate code. So Alt-Insert means I want to add something to my project or to my current location where I'm located. So let's create a new PHP class, and let's take a typical example. Let's add a customer or a person or whatever we want to add. We can automatically select the namespace that we want to use. So if we use completion, we can pick one of the namespaces that are in our project and make use of that one. But right now I'm going to ignore the namespace and just go with a new class. Right, so we get an empty class here and we can start writing code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a couple of properties. Let's say private name. Let's maybe also add an age. And because we are good PHP citizens, let's also add the variable type, and let's say that name is actually a string and that age is an integer and is called age. Once we have that, once we defined what the shape of our customer should be, we can actually, instead of copy-pasting code from other classes that we created or manually start creating all of the code that we want, what we can now do is use Alt-Insert again and start generating code. So what we can do is, for example, create a constructor based on the properties that we just created. So if we create a constructor, we can pick the properties to add. Let's add both of them. Go with OK. And you will see that we now have a customer where you see that the customer is assigned, that the values are assigned and so on, but also that the doc block comments here have been used. Same thing with getters and setters. If I want to create getters and setters, I can do the same thing, and you will see that those are generated as well. So really easy to quickly generate some code for us. We can also create overrides. So for example, if we want to override one of those PHP magic functions, or maybe even a toString, what we can do is create some code, and now we can start implementing our toString methods if we want to do that. Now, let's show a couple more things of things that we can do in our codes. Let's imagine that our customer can have multiple email addresses as one of the properties that we have in there. So let's say emails equals a new array, and we are going to say using doc blocks that this is an array. What we can now do is make use of a couple of nice things in the editor to make writing code here easier. So for example, in our toString, let's imagine we want to iterate over all those emails and write all those emails into a new variable or to console or whatever. What we can do is use our this, then we can use our emails, and then instead of writing a proper for each manually, we can say .fe, which is a postfix template, and if we invoke that one, you will see that we can now immediately start doing whatever we want to do with that person. There's a couple of other things that we can do. There's, for example, language injections as well. So let's say we have our, let's add a new property. Let's say we add some CSS, and we want to say that this is going to be a string. What we can also do is assign something in that CSS and say that this CSS, for example, is an injected language. And what we can do is say that this, for example, is CSS. And what we now get is inside of that string, we get CSS code completion. So if we now type a new class, for example, and we say we want to add a color, you already see that you get the CSS code completion in there. And we can add, for example, a color and say we want to add red as the color, and we can make it red. This works for JavaScript, for JSON, for CSS, and a couple of other things. But what I think is one of the most insane ones and really impressive ones is that it also works for database support. So you may have already noticed that we have this database tool window here in PhpStorm, and I already connected to a database that has a city, country, and person table with some properties or with some columns that we can explore and so on. Well, if we make use of some data access framework or raw SQL queries, for example, what we can do is we can write a select statement, and that should be select from, and you will see that all of a sudden you get code completion based on the current database connection that you have. So for example, if we say select star from person, we can go there where ID, there's a person ID equals question mark, and we can even say alt enter and say that we want to run this query in our console. So we can say run query in console, let's say a new console. And because the person ID that we had in the query is still a question mark, so a parameter, I can add the parameter here, and you will see that the query will run, and I can make use of that thing. So you will see the results there, and I get back nothing. Weird. Probably the wrong connection. Anyway, you get the idea. You can quickly jump between the editor and the database tool window that you have. There's lots of additional things in terms of editing and so on, but since we are a little bit time constrained for this webinar, I will hand over to Paul, who is going to focus more on the web development tools and maybe some things like version control and stuff like that. Paul, up to you.
Do you want to take any questions? Anybody have any questions? You can ask right now, just start talking, or you can go into your chat window and Maarten and I will watch that as well. All right, we'll continue then. Thanks, TransEurope, for having us. Thanks, Maarten, for covering the hard stuff. That database stuff is magic, isn't it?
It is. It very much is.
Maarten's the hardest working person in developer advocacy, so it's always a challenge going after him. I'm Paul Everett. I'm a developer advocate primarily for PyCharm and for WebStorm. I'm in Virginia, and what that means is Maarten gets to go to the cool conference locations like Hungary, and I get to go to Ohio. I'm going to cover a whole bunch of things today. Let me go ahead and share my screen, and I will turn off my camera. Let's see. Yep. And go to here. All right. And go back. All right, Maarten, you see my screen okay?
It's very visible, yep.
Okay, cool. What I'm going to talk about is WebStorm, which Maarten mentioned is bundled in PhpStorm. It's also bundled in PyCharm and most of our IDEs. And that kind of points to one of the things that Maarten talked about. Who are we? We make professional tools for professional development. What do we mean by professional, and what are we good at? We're not an editor that looks at files. We are an IDE that looks at projects, all the code in your project, all the code in your dependency, and we index all of that code and let you jump around and refactor and rename and do all of your activities. We also take your other code-related activities. Maarten showed databases, things like version control, running your code, debugging your code. I'm going to hopefully show test running, and put them all in a consistent, friendly, pretty face where if you know one thing, you know all the things. And then kind of the last thing that we do is, and Maarten also alluded to this, there's a lot of crappy work that goes into development, and life's too short to do crappy stuff. Why not let your tool do your janitorial work for you? A lot of the things that Maarten showed and a lot of things that I'll show are related to let the IDE be your janitor. Maarten, if you could remember, make sure to give me a nudge 5 minutes before the end. I want to make sure I get to test running, visual testing.
Yep.
What I'm going to show, or I won't get to 42, but I'll get to a lot of these tips and tricks. They say they're from PyCharm. I'll show them in the context of WebStorm, which having this playlist allows me to go really fast, because if you want more information, you can come back and see a short video, a write-up, an in-depth treatment, or a long video where you hear me narrate it. And so I'm going to go through a bunch of these tips and tricks as fast as I can, trying to skip over the ones that Maarten already went over. I'm going to do them in the context of this, I don't know, 12-part, something like that, tutorial that I did for React, TypeScript, and TDD, which has a write-up and video going with it as well. So let's go ahead and begin. I'll go over to WebStorm, and I'll start with the one that I think is the mother of all shortcuts. Maarten says search, search. For me, it is find action. I am a man of a certain age. I can't remember yesterday, much less 527 keystroke combinations. Instead, I know one. For example, perhaps I want to find a string in the path. I can't remember find in path, but I can remember find action. Command-Shift-A on the Mac, and I can say find in path. And there it is, and it even tells me what the shortcut is if I want to bother with remembering it. So find action, the one ring to rule them all. I'll also show slimming down the IDE. Ooh, JetBrains, big and fat, all these things on the screen. Well, you know why there's a bunch of things on the screen? Because we do a lot of things. And as you learn, you can turn off these things and have more of a distraction-free UI. So what I do in my development is I turn off the toolbar, and I turn off the tool windows, these things around the bottom. And I leave the status bar, but I turn off the navigation bar. I'll get back to that one later. And then I have this layout. And then I do one more thing. I turn off the project tool window because Maarten showed, and I will show, there are better ways. Don't think about files, think about code. Navigate by code, not by files. Now, we have one last thing that we can turn off. If we really want to focus and not have a whole bunch of things in our brain, tabs are actually the enemy. Because when you have 500 tabs open, you don't remember where that tab was. Instead, learn better ways to move around quickly instead of tabs. So how can I turn off tabs? I can go to Preferences and speed search for tab placement, and I can change it from top to none, or I can use the trick that I just learned, find action. Preferences are actually in actions. And so preferences such as tab placement none is actually something I can toggle from right here. And I change that preference to on, and now my tabs are gone. Maarten talked about different ways to jump around. The thing that I use the most is recent files. Because the thing that I probably want to go to is the thing that I was probably working on just 10 seconds ago, the last thing. So this test, for example, well, actually, I'll say this. I'm in code that I'm writing, a counter, and I'm in a test that I'm writing for the test. What is the most likely place that I want to go now? I want to go back to the counter. Recent files will, by default, put me on the last thing, and I hit enter. But what if I want to go something further down, like the app test? I could use my mouse, I could use my keyboard cursor, or I could just start typing and speed search to filter. Maarten talked about speed search as a pervasive idea. Every time you're confronted with a long list in anything, just start typing. Don't use your mouse. Another thing, though, that we can get from this is, you notice we have a left column, recent files. Right column is recent files, but the recent files dialog also shows the tool windows, which I turned off a couple of minutes ago. When I want to go to the terminal, I bring up recent files and I start typing terminal and I hit enter. That's the way I get to the terminal. I don't use the terminal tool or some shortcut or any other thing. Recent files, speed search, terminal. Also, when I jump around, I talked about navigating by code, not by file. So for example, this thing, component. I could try to remember, or actually, let me go back to my test.
Paul, it seems like you muted yourself somehow.
I must have hit some kind of keystroke. That's never happened. Thank you for letting me know. How far back do I have to go?
Maybe 10 seconds.
Okay. So instead of navigating by putting my cursor on counter, I can navigate by symbol. This is the one I use the most. Navigate by symbol, and I start typing counter. I can speed type it, not have to do all of it. Hit enter. I put my cursor right on the definition, exactly what I want. If there is actually a file that I need to get to, I can navigate by file. This dialog that comes up, when Maarten showed it, he showed it with all using search or shift. All these tabs have different shortcuts for it. So I could type index.css and jump directly to that file if I want to think in terms of files. I should mention WebStorm is pretty smart. I talked about symbols like classes and function names. CSS is actually symbols as well. So I can go up to this and I can say, for example, find usages. And it will look throughout my project and find the places where the usages are found. I'm not actually putting that as a class on something. If I had like a class name and I was using it in my HTML, I could go back and forth between the CSS and the usage of it. Okay, when I'm doing all this navigation, for example, let me go jump into the React component. I'll jump into that. It's like, hey, that's pretty cool. Oh, that looks interesting. I'll go to that. Oh, wow. Wow, that looks interesting. I'll go to that. Oh, look, a squirrel. And I've forgotten where I was. And my brain's not big enough to remember 10 seconds ago. So I could bring up recent files. Where was I? Gosh. What you can do is go navigate forwards and backwards. So I want to go backwards using command right bracket. And I will just keep going backwards until I get to the place I started. But then I changed my mind. I really do want to go back to where I was. I can navigate forwards to get back to where I was. So this path of clicking and exploring and getting back becomes quite easy. All right. So I'll go back. Sometimes I do need to get to the files. I want to rename something, or I want to add a new file, or I want to go look at something in the directory structure. Well, I turned off the navigation bar because I don't want it up there all the time. But sometimes I do want it because I actually like the navigation bar and I use it a lot. You can activate the navigation bar and have it pop up temporarily and go away when you don't need it. So if I've got it popped up and I click anywhere else, it goes away. If I've got it popped up and I hit escape, it goes away. And then how can I use that navigation bar? Well, I can navigate around files, my entire hierarchy, and just say, oh, I want to open that one. I can go up and do things such as, okay, here's a list. I can see everything in here, but I want to get to set up tests without using my mouse. I can do the speed search and jump to that. I can do something even more. The thing that I wind up doing a lot is creating a file in the directory that I'm currently sitting in. So I activate the navigation bar and I do new file. And I say new component.tsx. And I now have a new file in that same directory that I was just sitting in, without having to open the project tools window, going to the place that I wanted to create it, and then turning the project tool window off again. I can also do more things. I can do some of those kind of actions that are placeful, that take a place in your directory system. For example, find in path. So if I want to go up to maybe public and do a find in path from here, I'm sitting on public. And if I do find in path, which is Shift Command F, it will fill in that directory and do find and path from that location. So you can also do action kind of things. And then here's one that's really good. I can go up, find a file, and I'm like, heading, that's not really what that is. I want to refactor rename and change the name of that file. And I did it without opening project tools to go select the file, or opening the file and doing it from there. Okay, onwards, some janitorial things. Let me go back to my index.tsx. This is the top of my React application. And I should have mentioned this is a React and TypeScript application that was created using Create React App 2.1 and passing it -- TypeScript. So it's kind of an out-of-the-box React app that uses some of the things that I did in the tutorial. And if I'm sitting on this line with my cursor on the from, and I want to add a new line after that, well, you know, I could go to the end of the line and hit enter, and that's a lot of work. Or I could just, I'm sitting here, I could hit enter here. Oh, nope, that's not going to work. Shift enter is smart start new line. It will start a new line and it will start it with the indentation correct. So for example, if I'm back in my counter and I'm on this and I hit new line, it will indent it correctly for where I need to be. Sometimes I need to add a new line, but not after. Instead of I do it before, the old Paul would go to the end of the line, hit right cursor, hit up, hit enter, hit up, and hit tab. Oh, look, I did too many tabs. The new Paul has learned that there is a add new line in a smart way, but add it before the current line. Alt Command Enter makes a new line before wherever your cursor is sitting with the correct indentation. Another thing that I do sometimes, for example, I've got, let's just say for some reason I want this arrow function moved out of the class and I want to put it at the module level. What that would usually mean is highlight the code, Command X, go to where I want to go, hit down, Command, all that extra work. Instead, I can, if I'm just sitting in the middle of it and I make that decision, I can mark and extend selection. So with the keyboard, I've now selected this symbol. I've expanded the selection and I expanded it to the line. And if I keep going to extend the selection, eventually I will get the entire arrow function. And if I went even further, I get the whole class. I went too far, so I want to shrink the selection a little bit. Now that I've made the selection without using cut and paste keyboard or anything, I can move the selection, line up, line down, etc. It lands here, and then I retab it. All without taking my hands off the keyboard. All right, put that back where it was. Something that happens a lot is, and this is just prime janitorial work. Let's say I've got some spaces in here and I've got some extra, well, extra lines kind of count. But let's say that this is tabbed a little too far, extra lines here, and I want to fix all this code, but I don't want to do all the work to go and be a janitor. Reformat code is the sequence that I hit all the time. I reformat code even when my code is already reformatted because I just want to let the tool do the work for me. It's syntax aware for TypeScript, JavaScript, HTML, PHP, everything. Another thing that I might want to do is optimize imports. So for example, let's say I've got, let's say I'll go back to my index.tsx and I'll show one other example first. I haven't imported my app. So I'm going to delete this line. And I've got this symbol that says that I've done something wrong. I have a warning. Well, the janitor will do our work for us. Alt-Enter, and it generates the import for us. But it can actually do that a little faster. If I'm typing and I get this autocomplete, hitting enter not only autocompletes for the name of the component, it generates the import for us, which is pretty nice. Now let's say I commented this line out and those imports show up as, what's the warning? Unused import. We have a inspection telling us you're importing some things that you're not using in this code. More janitorial work. And maybe I've got some, extra spaces and things like that. More janitorial work. Instead, optimize imports is your friend. It will clean up your imports, putting things with duplicate spaces and removing unused imports. That's another one that I use all the time. Let me put things back. It's all part of one editor transaction. Okay, my code's back in good shape. So I showed generate imports while typing. You should never stop what you're doing. For example, I want to reemphasize this. I'm in the middle of working. I don't need to stop, go to the top of my file, find the right place to put the import, type out the import, get it wrong, retype it 7 times. Instead, let your tool generate your imports for you. Okay, onward. Here is a place that happens all the time. I'm going to go to the counter. And I've got this class, and maybe I decide that it should actually be called incrementer. And I think I'll just change it to incrementer. But then I remember, gosh, I think I've imported this 1,000 times in this project. Am I really going to go all over the place? No, I'll just leave it as counter. Instead, you can do a refactor rename. And this is a case where we are a professional tool for professional development. And we know all of your code. And we know where it's being used and where it's being imported. And I can change this to incrementer, hit enter, and say, do you want to rename? This is even smarter. React has a convention that the default export should have the same name as the file. Do I want to change that? Yes, I do. Now, if I go back and look at my test, it's counter.test, and the name of the import is incrementer. I'm sorry, the name of the file is incrementer, the name of the symbol is incrementer, and all of the usages are incrementer. But then I realized, oh, that was a terrible mistake. Now I have to go back to all of the VCS. And by the way, it also did the VCS changes for us to flag all the places where that symbol was changed. But I realized I really wanted it to be counter. Oh my gosh, all that work I have to do. Instead, undo remembers that refactor rename as one transaction. You say okay, and it's fixed the name of the file. It's fixed the name of the symbol back to counter, and then all the usages of it are back to counter. That refactor rename is worth $1 million or €1 million, I should say, just for that one case. Now, I'm working along, and I've got this thing called shallow, and I'm not really sure what it is, what it does. And I can stop what I'm doing and go do a Google search, or I can navigate to the code, kind of stop what I'm doing and read that. But instead, I can use a tool, view quick definition, and I can get some information in line about the place that defines it. Which is a non-disruptive way to consume something. Or if I'm in the middle of using it, I'm like, what parameters does it have? It's yelling at me about something. I expect some arguments. What should those arguments be? Parameter info, Command P, will tell us a little bit about what's needed. And as you move from parameter to parameter, the bold will move as well. All right, onward. Let's see. Maarten, how am I doing on time?
A little bit short of 10 minutes.
A little bit short of 10 minutes. Okay. Then I'm going to go into a little bit about some of the tools and how they're helpful. An IDE is an integrated development environment. And that means we take some of your work like running code, debugging code, testing code, and versioning your code and put a pretty face on it. I'm going to bring up the version control tab. And so down here in a tool window, you don't have to leave the IDE, go to a terminal and learn some command line thing. We're telling you what's changed. And I can click on this file. I can bring up a visual diff that tells me exactly what the lines are different. I can undo some of those changes. I can navigate to the next file and the next file and see all of the changes. I can also look at log to go and see other things, even upstreams, and do merges and things like that. So visual version control extends to things like it's time for me to commit, and I'm in the middle of the commit window, and I get an editing tool in here, but I also get a diff tool here. And this diff tool is actually our editor. And as I look at some of these changes, I can unselect some of them to make them partial commits and leave some things out and go from one thing to another thing while working on my code. So that's the commit tool. Now, on to the one that I really wanted to show for this session about these 12-part React, TypeScript, and TDD. TDD is test-driven development, and I'm a big believer that when you're writing your front-end projects, for example, in React, Life is too short to write your code, go to a browser, click the universe, and see if everything still works. You should do testing not because you should eat your vegetables. You should do testing because it's a faster way to work. And in the React world, there's something called Jest, which is testing without a browser. It uses a fake DOM called JS DOM. I want to get into TDD mode. This is my test for a component called counter. And I've got counter, and actually I'll navigate to it. What I really want is my code on the left, my tests on the right, and my test runner output on the bottom. I don't want to bring back tabs, so I'm going to do split vertically, and I have two things open. And over here, I'm going to bring up my test code. So I've got my counter component. I've got my tests for the counter component. And now I can run my tests, for example, all tests. And it will fire up the Jest test runner in the bottom and go into watch mode. And as I work on my test, so for example, the default should start at possibly another value. And here I say 10. If I make this 100 and save, then I see that that test failed. And let's say that test failed, and over here, I'm not even in that test. I can go to the failing test, double click on it, and it will open on the line with the failure. And if I change this back to 10, didn't even have to save, the test reran and passed, and all of my tests were passing. We do this bringing all of your development activities into one tool and give you visual testing. But there's even one step beyond that, which is I'm in the middle of writing my tests as part of writing my code. And I'm really confused about why this doesn't work. So let's put it back at 100. And I'm not running the test, but I'll go ahead and run them so that they fail. And I don't really know why it failed. So what I could do is put a breakpoint right here and then run just this test, but run it under the visual debugger, and it will fire up the test runner, fire up just this test. So I'm really focused on what I'm doing, and it will stop in Node.js, in JavaScript, in TypeScript actually, on that line, letting me see everything that is in the scope at that point. And I could poke at the wrapper. I could actually step into my code to get into the counter. For example, I could put a breakpoint here and rerun the test, and it would stop at that point. So that's a combination of a tool that not only makes you productive at developing, it makes you productive at testing. And it not only makes you productive at testing, it makes you productive at debugging and exploring during the process of testing. Okay, I will wrap it up at this point and hand it back over to Maarten, who might have any questions that have come in.
I haven't seen any questions apart from the couple of ones that we answered in the chat already. Just before handing it back over to Attila, I want to quickly highlight a couple of places where you can find more information about JetBrains and about our products. I know those guys are giving away one license for all the products, but if you're not one of those lucky people that wins that one license, we do have 30-day trial versions of all the products on our website if you want to try it. Follow us on Twitter, look at our blogs, look at the product pages if you are interested. And I would also say if you're interested in more content that we have or want to see more on how to work with PhpStorm, WebStorm, PyCharm, and so on, head over to our YouTube channel and have a look at JetBrains TV because we have lots and lots of content there. With that, Attila, I think we can switch back to you.
Okay, thank you, Paul, and thank you, Maarten, for this great presentation. If we have not any questions, we can end this session.
looks like all thanks. So thank you for joining and thanks for being here.
Yep. Thank you.